Okay, we've got 1:30. Why don't we get started? Good afternoon, Research Methods. Welcome back from your weekend. I hope you had a restful weekend. This is Monday of week 16, so lots of exciting events coming up. Just to let you know, I had a very exciting Friday. I was at the Columbus airport at 6 a.m. Waiting to get onto my flight, and my flight was canceled, as were almost all flights going from here out to Chicago. So actually didn't go to the conference, which was on technology in the classroom. I came back here and I Skyped into my conference and I gave my talk by way of Skype. They turned the display around so I could see the audience, and after I gave my talk, I was able to take questions and say, okay, I see you with the white sweater. What question do you have? Hands were going up, and we had a actual wonderful conversation. My co-presenter was fantastic. She was there live, and I picked up lots of great ideas from her. So it turned out to be a wonderful conference, even though I had to Skype in. So anyway, thank you for the schedule change that exacted on us. Okay, so looking ahead to what we've got later on this week, we're going to have our final article analysis. This is the last week of classes, and 1 week from today, we're going to have our final exam. Can we give it up for the final exam? Not only is that great news, right, but we're going to be here at 6:30 at night doing a final exam, and might go as long as 8:30. So like I always say, the good news just never stops in Research Methods, right? Okay, so let's just remind you a little bit about what will be happening on the final exam. Not too different from most of your section exams. Monday, December 16th, 6:30 to 8:30 in this room. The exam will be worth 100 points out of the now 750 for the entire course. Actually, 750 are on the syllabus. You might know that you've also had 4, 5, or 6 different extra credit opportunities. So if you add all those up, we might be back to something like 800 points. But there's 750 on the syllabus now. And so you'll have the entire period for this. This is twice as long as we normally have. That doesn't mean I'm going to make the test twice as long. The test will not be twice as long as usual. It'll be slightly longer than a usual section exam, but it won't be a lot longer than a usual section exam. So I think that's the fairest way to go. No need to bring a formula sheet. I'll provide you with the formulas that you will need to have. This, by the way, this slide is available on the S drive. The slide is available on Blackboard 24/7. I'll go over this each of the next days. So if you want to take this information down, you can, but you wouldn't have to. Okay? You might have to save some things to your assignment inbox, just like we've done before. And basically, I think what is maybe most important on this slide is I'll divide this up. We haven't had any kind of section exam since November 22nd. That was the day before that we went away on Thanksgiving break. Okay, so we've had some material last week, we'll have some material this week. So the first 50 points will be emphasizing that information since we've come back from break. And then the next 50 points will be really quite comprehensive. It will take us back to sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so that's how it will be organized. You'll recognize that the first several questions will be from the most recent information, and then you'll see the questions going backward in time. No particular order, but just spanning over the course of our semester. Who's following that structure? Does that work for us? Okay, pretty straightforward. I can say more as we go on, but I just thought I'd get this on your radar now so we're not panicking on Friday. We want to sort of ease our way into the final exam. Again, worth not all that many points in the whole scheme of the course, and even fewer points in the whole scheme of your Denison education. Okay? Please go ahead, Jen.
How much of it will be computational?
Yeah, I haven't figured out. There will be some computation on this, and as we get closer, I'll give you a heads up on that. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be something from the computer quiz that we missed. I think it's just fairest to everybody that we give you a chance to demonstrate your knowledge on that. But I think that it probably wouldn't be a lot more than that, right? So
you wouldn't suggest going back through and like practicing all the computational stuff we've done this whole semester?
maybe not all of them, but I think what happens is sometimes when you're practicing the most recent manual computations, you're really getting your skills down for the other ones. So for example, if you were to practice the factorial designs, and if you were to practice the regression, that might be really good practice. And I can say more about that as we get into it. Okay. Something else, and we'll have this conversation again tomorrow and Wednesday and Friday. Okay. Okay. So that gets it onto our radar. We've now talked a bit about the final exam, and this again is available 24/7 out on Blackboard and the S drive. It's called About the Exam. Okay. All right. Thank you to the, I would say, 13 or 12 of you. I've watched this video 3 or 4 times myself, so maybe not all of us have gotten in and watched this one. Please make sure that you watch the videos before we get in. There is one note that I have. I mentioned that I had a great time at the conference, that my co-presenter was fantastic. She actually threw out a couple of ideas that I wanted to try immediately. So this weekend, I tried some of her ideas. One of the, tomorrow you'll have 2 videos, for tomorrow's class you'll have 2 videos. So tonight, please watch 2 of them. They're already there. One is a regular video with me standing in front of the PowerPoint doing my typical thing, and that PowerPoint is available to you already. The other one is using a piece of software that she suggested, and this is the software that's used by the Khan Academy. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of the Khan Academy, and I thought it'd be fun to try one of those. So I just put something together. I think that's only 7 minutes or so, but that's the second video for you to watch. And both of these are listed in Blackboard as always. If you were on Blackboard, you don't have to go there now. Under the 12:10 session, which is right here, that would be tomorrow's session, you have the usual PowerPoints to click on, the usual video to watch, and then over here I've got my supplementary video that is my first shot at using this kind of software that I just learned about on Friday in the conference. Wanted to see what your reaction was to that kind of video. Okay? All right, so I hope you'll enjoy watching both of those, and we'll have a conversation about that tomorrow. Okay, why don't we get into today's conversation, which was on quasi-experimental designs. And we've already had you watch the video on this and go through the PowerPoint on this. We talked about what it is that makes a true experiment so that we could contrast very strongly a true experiment with a quasi-experimental design. Okay? And here we were talking about the 3 factors that make up a true experiment. And you can see them here. In the video, I mentioned a contrast between operationalizing a given variable 2 different ways. One that might lend itself to manipulation and one that lends itself more to observation than to manipulation. Anybody want to maybe give us an example of a variable that could be operationally defined in a manipulable way or in an observational way? You can use the example from the video if you like, or maybe have your own example. Okay, thanks, Jenna. Okay.
Just for these purposes, using male and female.
Okay.
The two types, and you said in some ways it could be like a natural root thing where you can't manipulate it. So, for example, how males and females respond to a certain candidate.
Okay.
Like what their preferences are.
Okay.
So that would be non-manipulable.
Uh-huh.
But if you want to manipulate it, you could have people read 2 different articles. It could even be a candidate's speech or something, and have references to John,
Okay.
really obviously male name, or Joan, a really obviously female name, and see what the responses to that are. So in that way, you're manipulating gender.
Excellent, excellent. So we're setting up for quasi-experiments here. We're trying to understand what a true experiment would be. A true experiment would have some manipulated IV. Can somebody remind us, how do we define an IV? I know that you're all very familiar with what it is, but sometimes putting it in words is helpful. So how do we define the independent variable? Yeah. The variable whose effect we seek to know, right? Okay, so we might want to know the effect of gender on political polling. As Jenna alluded to, we could talk about a candidate. Are there male-female differences in how that candidate is perceived? It could be an issue, right? It could be a political issue. We could take something like healthcare, and we can ask, are there gender differences in healthcare healthcare policies and how those are perceived and so forth. And then we can also engage in this manipulated kind of variable with the John-Joan manipulation. Okay? The other possibility, another variation on what Jenna correctly pointed out, was sometimes you can just have a statement that is gender neutral. This is what the candidate is claiming to want to propose if he or she is elected. And then you put on top of that statement a picture of somebody who's very male looking or somebody who's very female looking. And then that would be the other manipulation. And you see what kinds of favorability ratings you get for those 2 different conditions. So who's following that? That a given variable can be now either observed or manipulated? Is that working for us? Anybody confused by that? Okay, really good. All right, then we have high level of control and random assignment. Can somebody help us out with why is it so important that we have random assignment in true experiments? Why does that matter? I allude to it in the video, and I've mentioned it earlier in the semester, but we haven't emphasized it recently. Why is it important to have random assignments in true experiments? I think I see somebody hedging toward an answer. It's okay if we make our way there. What does that buy us, having random assignment? Okay, thanks, Jenna. Yeah.
We can be confident that our outcome isn't attributable to differences in pre-existing groups.
Right, okay, so it might be the case that if we're using what we might call natural groups. So frequently when I teach this course, I actually have two sections of the course. I might have a 130 class and a 230 class, right? And I can tell you that I've done this over many, many years, and sometimes I have, same PowerPoint slides, same homework assignments, and all of that. And the atmosphere in the two rooms is very, very different. Same room, right? And just the classrooms are very different because of student behavior. Some classes are extremely active, some classrooms are much less active, and so forth. So it might be the case that if we don't use random assignment, we have some pre-existing differences, right? And we can't really eliminate those. And the nice thing about random assignment, especially if you have moderate to large sample sizes, is that you can now very evenly balance the different demographies, the different socioeconomic statuses, the different levels of motivation that you might have. So we can get more equitable groups through random assignment. It's all about getting comparable groups. You might get lucky with natural groups that just happen to be similar to each other and maybe even statistically indistinguishable from each other, but you'd be very lucky if you found that just by chance. Random assignment helps us get there. Who's following that logic? Does that work for us? Okay. All right, really good. Okay, and a true experiment will unambiguously demonstrate what causes an outcome. Okay, wonder if we can go on to some of these potential pop quiz questions. In your own words, how does the setting, lab versus field, relate to the issue of validity? And we have internal versus external validity. Somebody help us out with that potential pop quiz question. Okay, thanks, Mira.
The lab, we have more internal validity
Uh-huh.
than the field research because it's easier to control and you know that what you're measuring is what you're supposed to do.
Okay, excellent. So in Mira's response, we have a definition that she alluded to of internal validity. Are we measuring what we want to measure? Sometimes we think we want to be measuring intelligence, but we're actually measuring some index of socioeconomic status, right? So we're not always measuring what we want to measure, but in the lab we have control over the environment in a way that's not true in the field, so we've got a better shot at it, generally speaking. Did you want to develop that further, or?
Well, I actually had a question about the previous slide.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So I was just wondering, like, how can we use the word cause in this case? Because I know we're supposed to be very careful with that.
Yeah.
Is it okay to use it in this case? Like, can we actually say in a true experiment we can definitively use that type of?
Great. So Jenna's question is getting to this word cause. Would these three conditions be sufficient for us to go with cause? Let's think about another three to answer Jenna's question. And this is good review because only 1 week and 4 hours or so, 1 week and I think 5 hours, we're going to be on the final exam. Can we recall the three conditions that we had set up as necessary conditions for establishing causation? Not these three. This is about a true experiment, but three conditions for establishing a causal relationship. Yell them out if you remember them. Correlation is necessary but not sufficient. Okay, so correlation. Time-order relationship. What was the last one? Okay, Hannah's got it. Eliminate plausible alternative possibilities. Okay, so now let's see if we can tie those three back to Jenna's current question. If we have these, can we claim that we have causation? I can tell you that there's a philosopher, David Hume, who would argue that you can never really know. That's good. So I would go over to this light switch and throw this, okay? And I think that this switching, sorry for those of you who are bothered by that, I think that that's causally related. I'll put myself out there. David Hume would say, well, you might be right, but maybe you just got lucky that those lights were going to go off at that time anyway, okay? So a philosopher might tell you, at least that philosopher might tell you that you can never really know. You take the cue ball and you hit it into all those billiard balls and they go spewing out. I think there's a causal relationship between the contact of those balls and the spewing out of the others. But David Hume might say, oh, maybe they were just going to take off anyway, right? So maybe you can never really get there, okay? But for those of us who won't go as far as David Hume, if you can satisfy the three conditions that we've just articulated, then you probably have that. And one way to get there is by doing this. If you have random assignment, for example, you can begin to eliminate plausible alternative explanations.
So having those three features necessitate that you will be satisfying those three?
I think most scientists would say that, yeah. I like that you put the word necessitate in there because it gives me some pause, right? Again, David Hume wouldn't say that's enough, right? But David Hume wouldn't be satisfied with anything, right? Okay, right? And maybe he's right. Maybe those billiard balls really were going to take off at that particular time. But most of us don't go as far as David Hume. Wonderful philosophical question. Okay, so we've done now a portion of this when we talked about internal validity. Anybody want to chime in on the external part? I think Mira touched on that very briefly. Did you want to say anything more about external validity in these two? Or, so this is question number 1, and you correctly noted that the lab is better for internal validity.
Well, external validity would be better for the field.
Okay.
Because it's how it applies to the field.
Okay, and Nina had her hand up also. Do you want to add to that,
I
Nina?
was going to say something similar, but like the lab is too controlled, so the capacity to generalize is very limited.
Okay, excellent. So the lab is very controlled, and that's good for internal validity, but we actually don't know. It's almost too controlled for us to have any extrapolation. Okay, so that's a limitation associated with that. Let's develop that just a little bit further now in question number 2. We'll look again at lab versus field, as we did in question 1, but now we'll ask about the distinction between basic research versus applied research. And these, again, were some concepts that came up way earlier in our semester. It's good that we have them on the week before the final exam. It helps us review a little bit. Anybody want to help us out with lab versus field, basic versus applied? And we might reflect on that. And if you're not sure how to get started on that, maybe you can help recall for us anything that you remember about what we said was true of basic research versus applied research. Kip has something.
I'd say the lab setting is better for basic research because it allows you to isolate two variables and
Okay.
just identify if there is an interaction there.
Okay.
Whereas like the field would be better for applied research because you can see how an interaction, like one that you isolate in the lab, how that interaction plays out in like a natural setting in the real world.
Okay. Okay, right. So yeah, I think that logic is really, really good. We define basic research as research for knowledge's sake. We can even think of it as the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake, just because we want to know. We want to know generally how memory works. We want to know generally how depression works. At this moment, we're not trying to solve a particular patient's depression. We want to know fundamental aspects of depression or of personality or of intelligence or of how sensory systems work. How is it that we're seeing color here? Many of us see yellow and white on that screen. What is driving all of that? Even if we're not trying to solve a color-based impairment that a particular child might have, which would be a very applied problem, and that would bring us more appropriately out to the field in most cases. Okay? By the way, there occasionally is tension among researchers that do applied work versus lab work. And sometimes that gets on the intense side, but they both have their important roles to play. Any questions about those two before we move on? Okay. All right. Anybody want to tell us what they know about the Hawthorne Effect? Our book describes this fairly well. There's also this wiki on it. Natalie's got something for us.
I think that if you know that you're being watched, you might change your behavior in a way that you think makes yourself look good,
Okay.
or in a way that you think matches what you expect.
Okay, yeah, I made both of those points in the video, so thanks for picking that up. The Hawthorne effect is very much about that. That's change. We might call it an observer effect. We know that behavior changes when we're being watched. We had a special word for that early on in the semester. Anybody want to yell that word out? Reactivity, okay, reactivity, right? So we can review a little bit with that word, right? So we can talk about measures being relatively reactive or non-reactive. And there appears to have been great reactivity going on in the Hawthorne study. And maybe folks were trying to match what the researchers wanted. Maybe they wanted to look good. Anybody want to provide any details about that study itself? What was going on in the Hawthorne study? Yeah, thanks, Maureen.
It was like a factory, I think.
Uh-huh.
They were raising the lights to see if it made the workers more productive.
Uh-huh.
And it did every time they raised it.
Uh-huh.
But then they lowered it at one time and it still made them more productive.
Yeah, right.
Because they just wanted to like know that someone was watching them, I guess.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it didn't really matter whether the light levels went up or down when the workers on the factory floor knew that they were being watched and they knew that their behavior was being monitored under different illumination conditions. It didn't matter whether the lights went up or down, productivity tended to go up every time there was a change. So pretty interesting. Also somewhat controversial. If you read the wiki, some folks have argued that, well, maybe there are multiple interpretations there, but anyway, it gives us a chance to talk about observer bias and the reactivity and the idea that if we're being watched, our behavior is going to change. Okay, so speaking of changing behavior, I'll tip my hat just a little bit there and see if we can now get onto the issue of contamination. Can somebody explain to us what is meant by contamination when we're talking about experiments? Anybody want to help us with? Okay, thanks, Maddie.
When members of one group communicate information about like their specific study to another group.
Okay, okay.
So they know
Yeah, right. There's a sharing of information between the groups in a study, right? So this would be most important if we have a between subject kind of design, and some folks who are in the experimental group are chatting or texting or communicating in some other way with the folks in the control group, experiment group, control group, some back and forth information there, okay? And that sometimes can work against us depending on how much information is shared, how many people are sharing it, and so forth, okay? And that brings us to this question, and it gives us a chance to tie back the issue of contamination, which is brand new to us. We're thinking through its consequences with something that we learned earlier, type 1 and type 2 error. First, by a show of hands, who remembers doing type 1 and type 2 errors, okay? All right, why don't we do it this way? I'll begin to put the grid that we used to have when we first introduced type 1 and type 2 error. I'll put the grid up here. I need to get something with more ink than that one has. Okay, and we might do something like no, yes, being somewhat figurative here, okay? And we might say something like, out on this side, I'm going to say truth. This is a paraphrasing of what we had before. Maybe it really is the case that Prozac works, maybe Prozac doesn't work. Maybe our therapy works, maybe it doesn't work. In truth, yes or no or yes, does it work, okay? And then there's the decision that you and I have to make as a researcher. We're trying to figure out whether our therapy works. We're trying to figure out whether Prozac works, and we have to make a decision, yes or no. That usually takes the form of rejecting the null hypothesis. But we might have something like, we can even say that formally, reject null, reject HO, okay? And so in here, we're going to begin to fill this out. Does anybody remember what we say over here, over here? You help me. What do we put over on this side, if you recall? We have actually that Prozac is working, and we say that it's working. Okay? That's going to be a correct response, first of all, right? We will have made a correct decision there, okay? We sometimes call this, I mentioned it in passing way back when, we sometimes call this a hit, okay? We call that one a hit. Sometimes, though, we reject the null hypothesis when, in fact, the null hypothesis was false. So Prozac really, I should say, the Prozac is false, and we're rejecting this falsely. What do we call this up here? Does anybody recall? This is going to be an error. I think I hear it. This one's going to be a type 1. Okay, we'll call this one a type 1 up here. This might be in a slightly different sequence than what you had laid out before, okay? So we're thinking, hey, Prozac's really working. We pull the alarm on that one when in fact there was no smoke. Does that work for us? We pulled a false alarm. Who's following that? This is a false positive, and this is type 1 false alarm, which I'll put as false A. You can also call this a false positive if you like. Okay? So we think there's something cooking in the study. There's a relevant effect of our independent variable, and in fact there isn't. We've made this error. Okay, we can now just go over to the other side. This is sometimes called a correct rejection. Okay? That is, we say, you know what, there is no smoke, and in fact there was no smoke. So we sometimes call that a correct rejection, a CR. And then what's this down here in the remaining quadrant? Let's all yell it out. Type 2, okay? This is sometimes called a miss or a type 2 error. There's type 2, and this is now a false negative. So we concluded negative, okay, but we should have concluded positive, because that's, in truth, there really was an effect, but we missed it. In truth, there really was smoke out there, but we said, nope, we're not going to pull the fire alarm. Who's following that? Does that logic sound familiar to you? Okay, we've done that in hypothesis testing. Okay, so now, just a moment ago, we were talking about contamination. Let's see if we can put this together. If it turns out that, as Maddie correctly pointed out, the two groups are talking to each other, and some people who are in the experimental group are sharing what they know about that condition with those who are in the control group, and information is flowing back and forth. Sometimes what happens is that maybe the control group, for example, becomes demoralized. Gee, that sounds like a really neat treatment. I wish I were getting it. So they're now demoralized. If there was this demoralization, would that tend to increase type 1 error or type 2 error? I have to think that through. Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we have you vote, you think type 1, put up one finger if you think it's going to increase type 1 error. Put up 2 fingers if you think it increases type 2 error. And then put up 3 if you're not sure how to think about this. Right, so 3 is I'm not sure. 1 is type 1 error is increasing because of this. 2 is type 2 error is increasing. Okay, some people are honestly putting up 3s. Thank you all for doing that. Okay. Meg, would you like to help us out? I think think it is
I don't
one.
know how to explain it. I just don't know how to.
Okay, all right. So type 1. So type 1 actually is the correct answer. Anybody want to try to begin to work on an explanation for this? Why don't we go with Rachel? Yeah.
Would it be that, like, you would get a false positive because
Mhm.
they're kind of like, it's true, but since they're demoralized or desensitized or whatever to the effect, I guess they're not going to show.
Okay, that's most of the way there. Let's see, why don't we go with Kip? I think I saw Kip's hand next.
Going off the example you gave earlier about like if a medication was relatively effective and the other group that did not receive the medication became like demoralized,
Uh-huh.
their scores, say on some kind of like physical test,
Okay.
would be lower than people who are like moralized, so to speak.
Okay, right.
Excited about it.
Or invigorated, yeah, okay. Uh-huh.
And so there could be, like, you could observe an interaction, like, with a medication, even though it's really due to people just being excited or, like, demoralized about the
Okay.
medication.
Okay, that all sounds good. Anybody else want to add to that? I think that captures most of that. Some other elaboration on that? So what's going on here is, remember that we said that the correct answer here is type 1. So what do we know about that? We think there's an effect based on the information that we have. We think there's an effect, so we're going to reject HO. But actually there was no effect. Right? There was nothing there, but we thought that we found an effect, and so it's there falsely somehow. Okay? So the way I do this in the video is I give the two different groups, and these are their two different levels of performance. Because there is no effect, the group should be like this. Okay? But as Maddie was alluding to, there's some contamination. Folks are talking about what's all the cool things that are happening over there in that experimental group, and we're in this very humble control group. We're not getting all that. They get demoralized, and because they're demoralized, as Kip is alluding to, we actually get a decline in their behavior. They might not try so hard, or maybe if it's a mood test, maybe that depresses their mood. So now you and I see this difference. We see better mood in this group, lower mood in that group, but it's not because Prozac elevated this, it's just that because the contamination actually demoralized these folks. So we see a difference, but that doesn't mean that Prozac really worked. Who's following that? We only have access to what the data tell us. So here we're hypothesizing that if it were really the case that there was no effect, but we see this difference, that could be arising because of some demoralization that might come about because folks want to be in the experimental group. And by the way, let's take a side note here. Some of you might go into the medical field or you might go into psychology, and this is a very frequently occurring problem. A lot of times parents want their kids to get into the experimental group. I want my kid to have access to the newest medicine, to the newest medical procedures and so forth. And sometimes there's anger and or lawsuits about the people who don't get in to the experimental group. Because let's say it turns out that you're really dealing with an important mental health issue or a medical issue, and you could have been in the group that gets the treatment that turns out to work, but you were assigned over here, okay? Now, just because of the random number assignment, you wound up missing the treatment, and if that treatment works, you missed out on something really good. Who's following the dilemma? Okay, so this is, and there's not a correct answer to this, right? But we don't really know whether it works unless we have a control group. There's a flip side to all this. Suppose that the treatment doesn't work and it has a nasty, nasty side effect. Then the lawyers are saying, hey, how come my client got assigned to this treatment condition that has this nasty side effect? Well, we didn't know it had a nasty side effect until we actually did this. So lots of important ethical issues arise when we're assigning folks. Usually it's just considered that random assignment is the fairest way to go. This thing could be null, this thing could be very advantageous, it could be very disadvantageous. We don't know until we run the experiment. So we have to do it this way. Who's following that? Question? Or just a... Okay, okay. All right, let's go on to question 2, or B here. Does rivalry between the two groups tend to increase type 1, or does it tend to increase type 2? Okay, so now we've got the people talking back and forth, and the groups are beginning to rival each other. Okay, so we can put up 1 finger if you think it's increasing type 1 error, 2 fingers for type 2, and 3 if we're not sure how to think about this one. 1, 2, or 3 fingers. Okay. Okay, I think I saw Hannah come up early with 2 fingers. Is that what I'm seeing? Okay, so type 2 actually is the correct answer. So we're down here in this quadrant, okay, which would mean that the thing really is working, but we've missed it. Okay, now why would we miss it? Some idea about that?
Because if the two groups are both trying to, the rivalry makes it competitive, so both are trying to do better than the other one, which means that their score would probably be even
Okay.
though they weren't supposed to be.
Yeah, right. So the example that I used in the video is you might have a rhyming strategy for memory, and that does tend to help. So normally we would expect this kind of a difference. If you can use the rhymes, that's going to help. By the way, did anybody do that in Intro to Psych? Did you learn some mnemonics for memory during a memory lab in Intro to Psych? It might have been the rhyming scheme, it might have been the method of loci. Those tend to work, they tend to give you a boost. But if this group is angry that they didn't get that information, they might try really, really hard. And if you're trying really hard with rote, you can bump up your score a little bit, and that will tend to diminish that difference, making it harder to find for us to detect that difference, making us vulnerable to a type 2 error. Who's following that? Okay, one more time, we'll go off and we'll talk a little bit about diffusion. Does diffusion tend to increase type 1 or type 2? Okay, we'll have people vote with 1, 2, or 3 fingers here for diffusion. And I'm seeing a few people vote on this. Okay. I think Marin had an early vote on this. Marin's putting up 2, which is correct. So we're going to be down here one more time. So this is going to be more like the miss, which was to say that really the manipulation would work, but in the data that we're going to get, we're likely to miss it. Mara, some idea about why that's the case?
Well, everybody's like using the rhymes. And
Right.
for example, then like 2 of the same groups using the same thing.
Yeah,
So
right.
you can't tell if it's working.
That's right. So hopefully we would have a rote group and a rhyming group, right? But if there's contamination between the two, and the folks who are in the rote are actually using the rhyming scheme, that's going to bring their behavior up. So rhyming really does work, but we're going to miss it because of the contamination in our experiment. Yes, please.
Is diffusion just another word for contamination?
It's contamination, and I guess we're also going one step further here. And we're also saying that not only do they know about that, but they can use it. Okay, right? Not only do they know that the other group is testing on the rhyming scheme, the people in the control group, the rote group, they know about it, right? And they're going to actually use the rhyming scheme. So if this is maybe a cognitive manipulation, then you could have diffusion. If it's a medical manipulation, you would imagine that diffusion wouldn't matter, right? Just knowing that the other group is getting Prozac won't necessarily change your neurotransmitter level. Okay? But if it's something cognitive, they actually could use a strategy, like the rote case would be. Okay, really good. All right, any questions on any of that? Setting the stage for quasi-experimental designs. Okay, why don't we go off and have some conversation then about quasi-experimental designs. So I remember when I was your age and I was learning about research methods, we read directly some of the work from Campbell and Stanley, which was already a couple of decades old at that time. But their work has really stood the test of time. And one of the points that they make here is in this diagram. So can somebody walk us through what's going on here and what's wrong with this picture? Anybody want to help us out with that? What's wrong with this picture? Okay, thank you, Jenna.
You've got an observation at time 1,
Okay.
which is O1.
Uh-huh.
And you have X, which is some sort of treatment.
Okay.
And then you have a post-observation at time 2.
Okay.
And the issue is that you don't know exactly whether the intervention caused whatever change you observed at the second time.
Okay.
Or whether it's something else, like maybe what you said was maybe students just learn to use their time more effectively after not doing well on the first exam.
Okay, right. Okay. All right, so the example that I developed in the video is that this could be a math test at time 1, this is a math test at time 2, and they might be maybe a week apart from each other. During that week, you might have intervened and given the students some information about algebra. You might have brushed up their algebra skills, geometry, trigonometry, calculus skills, and then over here we're going to test them again. Well, maybe that brush up really helped, or maybe it didn't. It might just be that they weren't so good at managing their time the first time around. They more effectively managed their time the second time around, and this didn't really do anything, even though it looks like they got better. If that were the case, if we had this so-called pretest post-test effect, where you get better simply by virtue of the fact that you had taken the pretest once before and you're a little bit more experienced now, okay? If that were the case, and we do see a difference here, is that going to be a type 1 error that we have or a type 2 error that we have? What? Type 1, okay, that's correct, type 1. And can you say a little bit about why that's the case?
Because you think that maybe like the treatment helped, and like it shows positive, but it may have not been the treatment that made it positive.
Right.
So that would be a false.
That's right. So if we now, the null hypothesis would be something like, in the population, our algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and calculus manipulation help, and they increase scores. I'm sorry, it would be that manipulation does nothing, and we'd wind up rejecting that null hypothesis, and we'd reject that null hypothesis now in error because we have a simple pretest, post-test effect. Who's following that? Okay. Anybody confused by that? Okay, really good. All right, so then we can come over to this, okay? And this is now maybe helpful. Somebody walk us through what goes on in this case. Very similar, but not identical kind of a arrangement. What goes on here? Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Well, the second one would be like almost like a control group, so that the change is not, like the treatment isn't added, so that you can see if there is an effect or not.
Yeah, really good, okay? So what we're hoping here is this is our pretest, post-test control, okay, right? And if we do get an increase from here to here, then any increase that we saw up top probably can be discounted. But if we don't get the change from here to here, and we do get the change from there to there, that does tend to implicate X as marking the spot, so to speak. Okay? All right, who's following that? Okay, really good. Okay, so then we can get into some different kinds of quasi-experimental designs. Many of these will lack the randomization of a true experiment. Right? We talked about the importance of randomly assigning participants to different groups so that we can overcome some pre-existing differences. The first one here is the non-equivalent control group design, a group that is quote-unquote like the treatment group, and that can be examined by a pretest and by a post-test. So different ways of thinking about this. The pretest can be at least a little bit helpful. And then we get to this study by Langer and Rodin. And this is described quite extensively in our textbook. We also have this briefer link that takes us out to PubMed. So from our textbook or from the link, anybody want to give us some background on what was going on in this study in 1976? Okay, thanks, Natalie.
So the field experiment does
Great.
depend on the effects of enhanced personal responsibility and choice
Okay.
on a group of nursing home residents.
Okay.
And so the experimental group were given a communication presenting the responsibility for themselves, whereas the communication given to the second group stressed the staff's responsibility for that.
Okay. Okay.
And then there was another part where they gave them one group a plant to take care of, and then another one where they were told that the staff were going to take care of the plant.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's an excellent description, right? So all of that is really, really good. Okay, anything more that you want to say? Can you give us a little overview about what was found in the study, if you recall? It's okay if you don't recall, but okay. But that was a really nice setup, a lot of information. Jenna, can you help us
The
out?
ones that were given that enhanced responsibility did better, like have more positive outcomes.
Okay.
Those who were just being taken care of by the staff.
Okay. Catherine, was that a hand?
Oh no, I was going to say the same.
Okay. Okay. Anything that you want to add to that? Okay, yeah, so some of the dependent variables that they were looking at, they had some measure of alertness, some measure of activity, how active are the residents, how social are the residents, right? And these are some of the things that decline in later life. And it's sometimes a mark of a rapid decline when somebody becomes substantially less alert, less active, less social. And so we wanted to see, gee, what can we do inside of the nursing homes that might promote these kinds of things? So a very simple manipulation that wasn't too controversial is you give everybody a plant, but you tell the folks on one floor, here's a plant, it's a gift to you, but we want you to maintain it. We want you to take care of it. You need to water it on a regular basis or move it toward the sunlight. That's going to be your responsibility. Not a real heavy responsibility. The other floor was given a very similar kind of plant. Each of the residents was given a plant, but they were told, here's a gift for you, and no worries, we'll take care of everything. Okay? And just manipulations like that seem to have generated an improvement, or at least a difference between the groups, such that the group that had to take care of their plant and had to assume decision-making responsibilities, they were more alert, they were more active, they showed greater sociability. I think there was a hand a moment ago that went up. Oh, okay, is that all right? Okay, so who's following the logic? Okay, so why isn't this a pure experiment? We had a manipulation, right? I mean, we had, so one floor is getting the instruction about, hey, you need to take care of this thing yourself. The other floor is getting the instruction of, we'll take care of it for you. So that's a manipulated variable, okay, which is pretty experiment-like. So why does this one fall into the quasi category? Okay, thanks, Jenna.
Is it because they're just doing it by floor, So, okay, this floor gets this floor gets this. They're not randomly assigned control to certain.
That's right. Strictly speaking, I mean, it's very much like an experiment, but it's actually quasi. Quasi means like an experiment, but not exactly there. Right? So there could be, in principle, some differences between those floors. It might have been that years before the study was conducted, they put people who were in better shape on one floor and people who needed more assistance on another floor. Okay, so maybe we're not really seeing the effect that if we used random assignment, we might have had a better inference there about cause and effect. Who's following that? Okay, any questions on that? Okay, why don't we go ahead? Oh, let's talk about another kind of quasi-experimental design, the interrupted time series. Okay, and it looks something like this. Somebody want to walk us through what's going on here? Pretty self-explanatory, I think. But maybe somebody can just walk us through. Okay, thanks, Mary.
Isn't it just similar to the other one, except you have a longer time period to observe each?
Yeah. So it used to be that we had just something like the inner portion here, right? That was time 1 and that's time 2. And then if we do see an uptick here, that could have been it could have just been that we had a pretest, okay? But now it looks like we have all these observations and then all these observations out this way. Okay? Was that a question, Jenna, or a comment?
At first I was going to ask if you could see this as like a within subjects thing, but I guess they're not receiving multiple levels of the independent variable.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. I do. It's clearly, you could say this is a type of a repeated measures.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Right. Because here's measurement 1, here's measurement 2, here's measurement 3. Okay. So I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. Okay. And then we have some treatment, and we're hoping for an uptick. If it's a pro-social behavior, we're hoping for an uptick. If it's an anti-social behavior, we're hoping for a downtick in whatever that might be. Okay. And I think that gives us some confidence that we're not just getting a change from here to there. We have a sustained period of the behavior being down, and then it's sustained upward after that. That would be fairly convincing. Okay, and one of the examples that's in our textbook is also cited by Campbell, that in the 1950s, I think it was the governor of Connecticut wanted to crack down on speeding, and so he was going to have the police enforce speeding more thoroughly after a certain point in time. And so this is the number of suspended driver's license that are attributable to speeding violations prior to the crackdown and after the crackdown. And you can see that there's some variability. And in the video that you're going to be watching for tomorrow, it is difficult when we have these behavioral records. They are variable, and it's sometimes difficult to know whether a change is just a coincidental change, but I think that's pretty dramatic, what you see there. It's pretty obvious that post-intervention, the scores are quite a bit higher than pre-intervention. So again, we can get back to Jenna's issue. Does this demonstrate causation? Well, we can never really be sure, but most people would find that to be fairly persuasive. Okay? All right, and then we can try to put these two together. So we have the time series that we just saw. We had the non-equivalent control group. We can try to put them together and have a time series with a non-equivalent control group. Okay? So conceptually, it would look something like this. Okay? So there's our time series. And then when we go top to bottom, we have our non-equivalent control group. Who's following that layout? Okay? Does that work for us? Is anybody confused by that? It's a busy slide. Little confusion there for you? Okay. Do you want to state it as a question, or you just want to walk through, or?
I don't really have a specific question.
Okay.
Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Okay. Anybody want to help us out with what's going on here? We'll let some of the students talk us through the logic of this diagram. And then we'll do the example that's going to be in the next slide. But just so we get it here generically, and then we'll do a specific example. Anybody want to walk us through? Okay, thanks, Jenna.
So there's the multiple, it's a combination because, so there's this first group and this experimental group, and they get multiple observations, and then there's a intervention and then multiple observations. But then the reason it's combined with that other one is because you'll still have multiple interventions with the control group, but they won't get an intervention.
Right. Okay.
And then you'll still have the post
Right.
observations.
So,
Is the top the experimental group?
yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on there. Top is the experimental group, bottom is the control group. We're hoping that the two groups track each other, and then only that group will show a change in behavior. Okay? All right, this is one of the busiest slides, this one right here, one of the busiest slides, and we've got about 5 minutes to walk us through, but what a beautiful study this was by McSweeney, 1978. You can look it up in PubMed if you haven't already done so, and it basically is a real-life example, and this actually did occur, and it's picking up on this research design, okay? Really, really nice. Okay, so can somebody set the stage a little bit here? I spent some time developing this in the video. Anybody want to tell us anything that you remember about the video and what we have here? Give us any background that you can on what could be a very difficult slide to interpret. Okay, thanks, Mira.
The phone company or whoever wanted to lessen or reduce the number of local directory system calls because it costs a lot of money and people just use the phone book.
Okay.
So they charged 20 cents, but they started to charge 20 cents for a local call, and significantly decreased the long distance directory calls.
Okay, right. Yeah, so very, very nicely articulated. Yeah, and I can point that out, but I just want to set the stage a little bit here. I have to confess, I don't think I've used a phone book in about 20 years. And it's occurred to me that you're about 20 years old. So I don't know if any of you have ever used, have people here ever used a phone book? Okay. I could fully understand if you actually wouldn't know what one is, because it's hard to know why we still have phone books. I don't know why I get one about every year. One just lands on my front doorstep, and I don't know why that happens. I think it's an unfortunate use of paper. But anyway, there was a time when that was how we found out phone numbers, at least for local phone numbers. And as Mira correctly pointed out, that it is expensive for the phone company to have operators that are answering questions that you could have answered yourself by using the phone book. So they wanted to drive that behavior down to zero. They asked the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, if they can charge 20 cents for every local directory assistance call. And you can see in the open circles that over these periods of time, they have a relatively high rate of those calls. Here comes the intervention. The open circles drop way down to here. They were way higher than the closed circles, and the closed circles remain relatively untouched. So we see a dramatic change in behavior, open circles before versus after the manipulation, and yet the long distance directory calls, which were not affected by the manipulation, remain almost flat as a pancake. Who's following that? Okay, a beautiful real world example, and that really did happen using this kind of logic. Okay, now we can always come back. Is that causal? Well, David Hume would never be satisfied, but most of us would look at that reversal happening right here, and most of us would say that's probably a persuasive evidence for causation. How many people are persuaded by that change of behavior was causal? Okay, all right. Anybody not persuaded by that? Okay. All right. One last one. This actually is a carryover from an earlier version of our text, but we can talk about the logic that's going on here. It doesn't necessarily map on quite as well to the different categories that we have. Interrupted time series, non-equivalent control group. But what's the logic here? Somebody step us through this one. Kind of a busy graph. Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Just showing the differences between when only one, a car is on patrol and then when there's a helicopter and a car.
Okay.
And so the first is just a car, and then it decreases when there's a helicopter in the car, and then it goes back up when it's just a car, and back down.
Yep, okay, right. So we're doing this basically, right? We're doing this kind of a thing, okay? And there are particular days, sometimes within the helicopter interval, where the helicopter was not there, and occasionally you get the burglaries coming back up. But this is, again, fairly persuasive evidence that maybe that helicopter really is doing something. Okay, we don't have random assignment obviously here, so this is going to be quasi-experimental, but still pretty persuasive evidence. All right, that brings us to the end. So thank you for your participation. Please remember that tonight when you are on Blackboard, there will be 2 videos to watch. One has the regular PowerPoint, and one is this new piece of software that I was able to learn about just over this weekend. Please go ahead.
Will we have a review day or anything before the final?
Not a separate day or a separate session for this, but my review material is this. I've given you all of my PowerPoint lecture notes. I've given you a recording of everything. I don't know how to be more comprehensive in my review than that. Okay. All right, have a great day. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Okay, thank you. See you.
How you doing, Nestor?
All right, Frank, how are you? Good.
I'll follow up here.
Okay.
Keep going to research labs here.
All right. All right, so NERF 400 is going to be off to a run.
Yeah,
Away we go.
won't be long. We'll be back at it.